Just saw in that video seems to be part of this Trump method of maybe his belief that if he does it in public, it can't be a crime. He seemed to be kind of doing an impression of his phone calls with the Secretary of State, asking him to do things. And if he's talking about it in public, it can't possibly be a crime. That seems to be the way he approached his previous high crimes in office.
Well, that's absolutely right. And thank you for having me. I mean, when the impeachment proceedings went forward, obviously earlier this year, that too was based on President Trump's acts in public. They're the incitement to insurrection. But whether or not he thinks that carrying out some kind of real-time live stage parody is going to immunize him from criminal liability, the reality, as we conclude in our report, is that President Trump's repeated interference with the election administration in Georgia, his efforts to solicit and threaten senior state officials to certify the election for him falsely and to find exactly enough votes to rig the election back for him, that was a crime. And whatever he wants to say on stage, however much he might want to make fun of Secretary Raffensperger, I'm confident that in the end, the facts will come out and that the Fulton County District Attorney who's investigating will lead her wherever the facts and the law require.
You identify a possible felony in the list of offenses, and that is, and this is a Georgia statute that makes it a felony if you willfully tampers with any elector's lists, voter's certificate, numbered list of voters, ballot box, voting machine, direct recording electronic equipment, electronic ballot marker, or tabulating machine. Anyone who does that shall be guilty of a felony and serve a possible sentence of not less than 1 year, not more than 10 years, a fine not to exceed $100,000, or both, jail, prison sentence, and fine. How do you apply that statute to the evidence as we know it?
That's a fantastic question. This is a case where it wasn't like President Trump was going to get on a plane, fly to Georgia, and start messing around with the ballots, although God only knows what he'd have done if that had been a possibility. This was a case where he was calling senior state officials, most notably Secretary of State Raffensperger and a chief investigator in his office, Francis Watson, on December 23rd, and urging them to vary from state election procedures, and in Raffensperger's case, to find 11,780 ballots, the exact number necessary to alter the election outcome. Looking at a fact pattern like that, there's a strong case that President Trump committed the Georgia crime of solicitation of election fraud, that what he was doing here was soliciting Secretary Raffensperger with the intent that Secretary Raffensperger perform a certain act, and that act was itself a crime, the crime that you just described, the crime of tampering with ballots, tampering with the vote tabulation in the state. So I think looking at that, you'd probably see it charged as a solicitation offense, maybe a conspiracy offense. It could even help support a charge of intentional interference with the carrying out of public duties by a public officer. Again, in this case, Secretary Raffensperger. So there's numerous avenues through which President Trump's conduct could give rise to criminal liability here.
As soon as this phone call became public and the Raffensperger's side released it to the media, we're all listening to it. We brought Georgia lawyers onto this show to outline all of these statutes that they knew about, that we didn't know about, within Georgia law. And they were rattling off these things that don't exist. Some of these statutes, they're different, from state to state, obviously, as you know. And as we kept hearing about them, kept looking at them, kept reading them, we kept saying, wow, these laws in Georgia are very solid protective lines around the voting process.
Well, that's exactly right. And there's a reason why it's so important that there are state level laws like this. Obviously, in our federal system of government, the federal law is what it is. There are powerful bases, compelling bases for the Justice Department to investigate a significant amount of what happened surrounding the 2020 presidential election. And obviously, there's a select committee in the House that's doing that too. But under our constitutional system, states actually have the primary role in carrying out presidential elections. The federal government hardly has much of a role at all. And it's really Congress, not the president, that has a role, namely certifying the electoral ballots, as occurred this year on January 6th. And that's sort of an obvious point. You wouldn't want the president, who might be a candidate or who might have very strong feelings on replaces him or her, to have a big role in the presidential election. So states are the key players here. And states like Georgia have put in place powerful laws to protect the integrity of their electoral process. And those laws, I think, apply with full force here. A circumstance where you have a candidate calling up and threatening senior state officials if they do not falsely alter the final count of votes to alter the outcome of the election in the state. Frankly, if that weren't a crime, you would think that we need to go rewrite the criminal laws to make sure that it is. And in this case, we don't need to do that. Georgia's laws are solid. I think the public record powerfully supports potential criminal charges. And that's why I think it's so crucially important that the district attorney in Fulton County is investigating this, since her office in Georgia is the only investigating office that is itself a witness to the crimes here.